Hey, hey,
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
very good to see you.
Yeah, here. The alarm systems are going off in the church here.
Oh no.
Yeah, I guess I hit the code wrong or something. So I got to. They call me. I said everything's fine. So, oh well. And then we had a window broken out in the front, so got to get that
Okay.
replaced.
Oh
Yeah,
god.
it was an accident. The yard guy was doing it as weed eater, kicked it up and shattered a 4 by 7 foot window. So completely shattered it. So got that fixed. $600. Oh well. That's why we save our money. That's why we save our money, man.
Uh,
Oh well. So how you doing?
Doing quite well. How about yourself?
Doing good, Michael. It's been a busy week. Been a busy week. Had a lot to do. So homework at home and everything like that. So
Yeah, good.
yeah. So we changed our Zoom meeting. Said Tuesday, went to Thursday. So we met last night. We had a lot of people joined last night. I think Thursdays might be actually better for a lot of the folks. We'll see. We'll see how that carries on though. Usually the Zoom things always start out strong, I notice, and they sort of fade out after a little while. I don't know if you've noticed that.
In time. Really, any group setting usually tends to do that. Some natural attrition rate.
Yeah. There's Lloyd. Hey, Lloyd.
I did get a message from Dayton. He said he's going to be running late, but he should be on. So he said probably about 15 minutes is what he thought.
Okay.
But he'll get on as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I think with that, Lloyd, I'm going to hand things over to you. We'll greet anybody else that jumps on, but this will be our last call for this discussion group. It's been a great journey so far, so looking forward to a strong finish. So Lloyd, I'll hand it over to you. And you are on mute, my friend.
There we go. Let's try that. Does that work?
Well, at least we got him on camera this time.
Yeah, at least I got my webcam working, but the lighting isn't ideal yet.
It's okay, Lloyd.
It's good you can see what I am seeing in front of me here. It's Michael, you probably can identify with just chaos boxes and stuff. In fact, I just finished. My son came over. We unloaded some heavy stuff off of our container. We're not done yet. We still have several more containers to come. But yeah, and this heat, of course, lifting outside and doing all that stuff is not fun. But anyways, enough of that whining. It's good to be here and gradually get things into shape. So anyways, good to be here this morning. Our last meeting of this discussion, and I appreciated the opportunity to do this, and I trust that it's helpful both for those that are watching live and those that catch the recordings later, and so that's good. So what I want to do today is just I want to give you one last piece of content that we didn't have time to finish last time, and then we'll just leave the rest open for some discussion to kind of wrap things up, takeaways, etc. Make sure that we've answered any questions, anything of that nature. So let's plunge right into it. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, cool. We are shared.
That's good.
Where did all my Zoom stuff go? Oh, here it is. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, something happened. Oh, there we go. Okay, got it. Okay. Good. Okay, so what we've done, I mean, we've looked at a lot of content to try to give an overview of some issues regarding decentralization. And the last thing I want to talk about in regard to decentralization has to do with multiplication. And multiplication is a big topic, and should be a big topic for us, because it has to do with our strategic efforts to grow the church and ultimately expand the kingdom. And when you talk about multiplication, it's one of those topics that people recognize the importance of it, but few are really excited about really doing it because it is hard, and it is a difficult hill to climb. Not everyone either has the gifting to do it or has the resources to do it. And so we talk a lot about it, but we don't execute on it very well. And of course, within the last 30 years, 35 years, maybe 40 years in particular, the language that has been used a lot around multiplication has to do with church planting. So we talk about, let's plant a new church, let's start a new church somewhere, which is all good. And we've seen, I mean, I was a church planter at one time, and we, over the years, we've seen a lot of churches planted. In fact, every church that that exists was planted somehow in some way. But the problem is not planting. The problem is how we plant and how we multiply. And so the question for us then is, how do we best facilitate the growth of the church? And this is where the decentralization piece, I think, can really offer some fresh thinking. So in a centralized church, when we try to plant a new church, start a new church, I think what we find is that to start a new or to replicate some other language there, a centralized church is really difficult and expensive, because you have to create this whole new infrastructure that's centered around the public space gathering. And typically then again, with using traditional models, then you create small groups to try to accentuate that. But that is really expensive, because to launch a public space event, you require everything from, you're probably going to require full-time staff, you're going to require the space, whether you're usually renting space, you're going to need all the infrastructure of anything you need with a public space. So you're going to have a worship team, you're going to have chairs, you're going to have the advertising that goes with it, blah blah blah. And I know several years back when we were planting churches up in the Pacific Northwest, we were kind of using as a rule of thumb that to plant a conventional church, you needed a minimum of $250,000, $250,000, and that really was not even really in many ways not even adequate, but you needed, that was kind of a starting point. And that's a lot of money. And sometimes they fail. There's a high failure rate among church plants, and you have to have the right people, the right place, the right circumstances, everything. It is not easy at all. And I admire those that have planted churches, because I've been there myself. I've gone through the journey. It's tough. It's difficult. And I know when I did it, and even though we were adopting some and trying to innovate with models that had never really been done before, even so, we were still, I think, largely restricted by the thinking that was limited to the centralized models. And I just wish I had thought through some of this stuff, or had the awareness of some new developments, which I can't. There's a lot of regrets in that regard, but you can't go back in history. And the thing is, I wouldn't have known where to go for that anyway. But it is really difficult and expensive. And so that's one of the reasons why it doesn't happen very often. And, if you look at it missiologically, you can say, well, if we are going to make a difference within our culture, if we're going to really reach the people who do not yet know and follow Christ, that it's going to require a massive amount of effort and work. And it's going to mean, if we're using a centralized church model, it's going to require more resources than we have. I mean, we just don't have those at this point. Now, maybe, if you graduated over 30, 40, 50 years, you might be able to do that. But I look at it and go, man, the church planting movement 40 years ago was talking this, and I'm not sure we've really come that far in 40 years. And yeah, a lot of new churches have been planted, but have we made a dent in the larger culture? No. In fact, in many ways, we've receded. So I'm skeptical of the centralized church model for multiplication. Again, this isn't to criticize. I know a lot of churches are centralized, using a centralized model. And my goal here today is not to denigrate what is happening, and God uses all sorts of different things. So this isn't about any particular church, but from a multiplication perspective, if we really want to go forward, we got to have different thinking. So what I really like about the decentralized model is that in decentralization, we focus on micro multiplication. And in that case, you don't have to replicate the whole beast. You don't have to get the whole again, the public space thing in place. And of course, along with that, which is one of the things I didn't mention, in order to get people to come to your public space, you've got to do all this advertising and marketing and try to hope that people show up. In fact, I'll just quickly go back to that, the logic that existed back then. If you could get 200 people at your launch service, you can anticipate about half of them will stay, and that'll give you enough to start a church. Well, wow, that's quite a leap. And so you have to really work hard to get 200 people in the building. Then you get 100 people, and then what you find out later, and I know I've talked to some of the church planters that we've had in our district up in the Northwest, who have been frustrated by the process. Even though they were successful, they did that. They got basically their 200 ended up with 100, but they found out that the 100 they were left with, the vast majority of those were not new people that were really seeking to follow Christ. They were people from other churches that liked the new shiny thing that was showing up in the neighborhood, and found that these were people that were probably disgruntled with their previous churches and bringing their baggage with them. They had expectations of church life that did not necessarily fit the model and the philosophy of where the new church was going. So you had all this conflict and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, it's just frustrating. But what happens is with decentralization, when you're focusing on micro multiplication, you're not trying to replicate the whole thing at the start. You're trying to work where your primary units are. And in this case, we're talking about the mid-size units, the social space units, and working on replicating those with, of course, as we've talked about before, making sure that they have with them key cells that are at the tip of the spear, at the tip of the funnel, that are leading and guiding them, and those can be replicated much easier. I don't want to just make it sound like, oh, you can just flip a switch and you can replicate, but 100 times easier than trying to create a centralized church built around a public space worship gathering. And so what you do is you create these, you have deliberate systems, and that's a whole nother question, which we don't have time to go into today. How do you replicate units like this? It's a lot different, and part of the reasons why this doesn't happen very often is because we're still thinking centralized models, and I think that's why some of this, some of the multiplication doesn't happen. But that's a whole other discussion. But it's much easier than trying to replicate the centralized model, because you don't require all the cost, all the infrastructure. You don't have to have full-time staff. You're working with primarily at these levels, just leaders who are lay leaders within the church who are passionate to follow Christ and to lead others. And you equip them for the journey of leadership, which we talked about a little bit last time and one time before. See that discipleship and leadership go hand in hand. That as you're developing disciples who are leaders, you can create new units much easier. And that's how the church begins to grow. And over time, there may be opportunities to create new hubs. So you might get to the place where you're thinking, man, we've got a whole group of these missional communities that are showing up in a particular area. region, and we say maybe it might be better to create a new hub for them in that place. Or you might have particular missional communities that have a distinct, say, ethnicity, or some other target, some other unique characteristic that you can say, yeah, there might be benefit in allowing them to have their own hub, and then you help them form that. But once you have everything in place, putting the hub together is not that difficult. But you're starting. The point is, where are you starting? Are you starting by replicating at the center, at the public space worship gathering, or are you trying to replicate at the level of the missional communities? And I think that's where the opportunity is. And I think we would get way more mileage on multiplication if we could focus on these micro multiplication levels. And micro multiplication ultimately is about building disciples who then are building communities around them. And that's going to start with personal space and social space. And then they would come together in the hub to form these larger units. But the primary units within decentralized churches are at the social space level. So I bring that up because as we close this off, I think the vision for all of this decentralization is not just, well, let's just create a better structure, let's just try to do things differently. It's ultimately about how we're going to have greater kingdom impact. And if we want to have greater kingdom impact, then we've got to be doing things that are going to allow us strategically to make inroads within the culture in which we find ourselves, and to reach people that are not yet following Christ. And so I think there's a lot here that we could do if we would just shift some of our focus. I think the days of, and I think especially with the way things cost nowadays, I was talking $250,000, say 10 years ago. I think that in light of the challenges that we have, even the difficulties that we have reaching our culture, it's going to take a lot. If we use centralized models, it's going to take probably closer to $500,000 to effectively plant new churches, and we just can't do that. And I'm not sure that we should be anyways, but that's a whole other story. So let's just stop there, because I did want to bring this piece in about multiplication. Any questions on that? Otherwise, we'll leave it. But I did want to make sure that we kind of content-wise ended with that material, because I think it is quite relevant.
Hey, Lloyd, I could go on for quite a while, but maybe you could give basics on a lay leader helping to establish a missional community. What kind of requirements are we talking? Because this is a big mindset shift. I found that a lot of people didn't feel like they were qualified. They weren't seminary trained, because they were constantly thinking back to centralized models. So you can only plant a church if it's centralized. So what kind of leadership minimums would you be looking for here?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And yeah, we probably don't have time to really dig too deep, but let me make a few comments on that. I think it really boils down to, there are certain qualifications, obviously. They need to be a follower of Christ and growing and probably, and not probably, they need to be part of that bounded set of disciples and leaders, or leaders in development even. But beyond that, I'm less concerned with qualifications. There are some, obviously. Gifting is there's pieces of that. But what I'm really concerned with, are we putting them in pipelines that are enabling them to grow and develop? And I think that naturally is going to weed out and filter out the ones who are really not gifted to lead, and is going to identify those who can. And so what I mean by that is that we're always, because we see discipleship and leadership development go hand in hand, that as we're working with disciples and we're training people as disciples, we're always providing opportunities for them to exercise their faith. And part of it is to give them opportunities to lead. And we test them out by putting them in opportunities where they can lead. So it starts even within. So even let's take, for example, within the missional community, starting by giving them small things that they can do within the missional community. And as they begin to, try these new things, I mean, first of all, you're modeling it to them. And some of you familiar with the leadership square. Michael has probably led some of you through that, where it talks about I do, you watch, I do, you help, you do, I help, and you do, I watch, kind of thing. Kind of that progression of that. And I think it just starts by we as people are following Christ, we give them opportunities. But we don't just throw them out there. I think where we make mistakes is we just don't say to someone, well, hey, do you want to start a new missional community? You've never done this before. You've never maybe even been in one, but yeah, why don't you go out and try this? And I think one of the reasons, and it's not just with these decentralized models, I think in the church as a whole, we're terrible at this. We put people in positions that are not adequately prepared. They've not had an opportunity to see it modeled. They've not had an opportunity to be mentored by someone, to be trained by someone. And as a result, we put them into a position that's destined to fail. And then we go and say, wow, this was a stupid thing. Why did we even try this in the first place? I mean, it's ridiculous how we end up in those places. So how would we do this? I think just simply we start by taking people who are, who are growing in their faith and who we see as having leadership gifts and potential. We start involving them and we start bringing them alongside us, maybe making them, I wouldn't necessarily use this language formally, although at one time in my life I would have. But I think we start building apprentices within our missional community and within our cell group so that they are getting the experience they need and the training, the mentorship that they need so that when they're ready, they can take this on themselves. So that's what I'd be looking for, is more the process. And I think the process itself is going to help us identify the ones that are capable of doing that. So I don't know, and there's a lot more that could be said, but hopefully that helps a little bit. Sorry, I've got some background noise here, but do you have any other comments on that, Mike?
No, that's helpful. And again, I know that's a bigger topic, but I think you've covered some of the base things that I would want to consider in there.
Hey, Dayton.
Yeah, mine would go, Lloyd, I would ask, hi, Dayton. Yeah, Lloyd, I would ask about the question of how is it vitally important if you went through this? Because I think that sometimes no matter how decentralized a church becomes, isn't it important for the whole team or the whole group to have the same DNA as the person that's guiding or leading? I think otherwise I think you may end up with a sort of, it may end up being kind of chaotic for a while. I think if no one's sort of pulling in on the same direction, if you grasp what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah. No, that's a great question,
yeah.
Malcolm. I think no, without question. So there's a few things I would say to that. One is that's one of the reasons why, and then I'm going to go off into a tangent a little bit here, but that's one of the reasons why we need to, as we're training people, they need to be involved with us life on life, and they need to be they need to see it modeled by us, because that's where the DNA really begins to take hold.
Right.
So it's a long process. You don't just teach that in a class. You don't just say, we're going to have a seminar on Saturday. We're going to bring you here for 8 hours. We're going to teach you this stuff and you're going to have it all figured out. No, the DNA takes much more. It takes a lot more work to instill that. Now, the bigger question is, because ultimately, I think this is what you're asking, is how do you change a church where this DNA is not in place and maybe the pastor has it, and how does the pastor transmit this DNA throughout the body?
Right.
And I'm not sure. I think that's what you're ultimately asking.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this whole process takes a lot of time. There's no, you can't, and Malcolm, you know this, and everybody else watching this knows this as well. You just can't show up on Sunday and say, okay, next week we're going into this different mode. We're going to change things up. And I know, Malcolm, you shared before how that was tried once before. That was an utter failure, because what was happening is you were forcing something on people where the DNA had not been set. And that's bound to fail. So you have to begin to change the DNA. And I think the way you do it is you don't just shut everything down that you're doing now, is that you ultimately have to run on a parallel path for a while. And you gather around you people that are ready. And so I think every church could start a mission, even though every church technically could become a missional community, even a small church could become a missional community really fast. There are some people that are just not ready to make that leap. So what you do is you just start by gathering those who are ready for that on a parallel track and say, hey, we're going to do this. Yeah, it's going to be in addition to what else we're doing. And maybe you need to pare back on some other things without taking away some of the bedrock items that people latch onto. But I think what it comes down to is you gather people around you and start living and modeling it. And that way you get a small group of people who begin to take on the DNA. And so it's not just then the pastor who's carrying the DNA. Then suddenly you've got 20 other people around you that have it. Then that DNA can eventually work its way through the congregation. Now, there are some people that are going to be, we're going to use all sorts of wacky biological metaphors. I'm not even sure they're even legitimate biologically, but I'll say them anyways. We could have people that are DNA resistant or new DNA resistant, and that are just not going to go for it. In the end, there may be some people who end up taking a hike anyway. But overall, I think that's how we make these changes. We begin to work them into the drinking water, and we do it slowly. We begin to model this to people around us. We begin to show them a new way, and then we allow that to spread. But I mean, and I know that's a long process, and there has to be some deliberation to it, some intentionality. You just don't kind of haphazardly think, well, maybe it'll take someday. No, I mean, there are some things you can do to accelerate that, but it does take some time. But that's okay. You work with what you've got, and I think you can run that parallel track for a while, where you get to the place that parallel track suddenly becomes the dominant track, and then you can look at differently. I'll just share an example which is totally different, but it helps explain how this works. I'm familiar with a Church of God congregation in Canada that was traditionally and ethnically German. And like a lot of ethnic churches, they want to hold on, preserve their ethnicity, their language, their culture, and they resist integration into the larger culture, not just within the larger culture of society, but even within the prevailing church culture around them. And so this German congregation, you could only speak German at the church. The services were only German, and I mean, that was the kind of like the how it started. And this church has evolved over 50 years to the place now where it is an English church. In fact, they just hired. In fact, Michael, you know this church, Grace Point in Edmonton. I don't know if you just announced that Dave Van Roon is going to be their lead pastor. And he will be, in the history of that church, for the first time, the lead pastor who does not know any German. And they've gone from purely German to kind of wishy-washy German to bilingual to having a parallel German track. And now they're actually, for the first time ever, 50 years, almost exactly 50. I think this church started in like 70 or 71. So it would be a little over 50 years. After 50 years, they finally, you can argue, are now a fully English congregation, but it's taken them 50 years to go through that journey. Now, I use that as one example, but I think that there's parallels to that with what we're trying to do with here. Now, hopefully it doesn't take you 50 years.
Yeah.
Some of us may not be around in 50 years,
Yeah.
but well, in fact, most of us on this call will not be around 50 years. Michael might be the only exception, but apart from that, yeah, it's, I mean, we want to, I think those are the way you do things. So hopefully that helps.
And Lloyd, one of the things I was thinking that is a current experience here in the Central Valley is what Michael was doing with 3DM and it took, I'm thinking how long, Michael, it took me to basically, I'm gonna say, buy in to say, yeah, 3DM has something worthwhile to say. And even after I had been in the huddles for some time, it took me some time to value what you were saying. And so I was thinking, Lloyd, about Jesus's example, and I'm talking about taking the DNA in. So you actually take in DNA from somebody else, or a way of looking. And Jesus, 3 years with his disciples, and if he's perfect at it, it's going to take us longer than 3. But then to navigate that point where, what are the things that are not negotiable with regard to what we're doing, and what can we keep so that people don't just bail because we're not giving them what they're used to. And so there's that critical point of being able to determine, as the leader, those values that I'm going to say the shakers and movers in the congregation hold on to, the ones that are going to stir up trouble if you cross them with things that they think are absolutes. But it is definitely not something you announce and it's done. And that relational thing you were talking about, Lloyd, is so important, where you're actually building values into people. And that happens slowly over time. They may agree at your face, in your face as you're talking to them. They may agree, but it takes time for them to actually say, "Oh yeah, this is mine." And Michael, I'll go back to the Kairos circle, and I mean, that's just a part of the way I think now. It's just the way I think, and that's a benefit from what your teaching was. And so when we think about this decentralizing thing, I think it's a slow go, and it takes a lot of grace and wisdom and intentionality, as you said, Lloyd. And the time frame is much longer than we want.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that's good. Good comments. Thank you. So, and that kind of leads into, I think, probably where I want to lead us for the last 20 minutes that we have here, is to kind of recap, maybe not so much recap, but to maybe just ask a few questions. Maybe, first of all, before I get into I have a question I'm going to throw on the board here or on the screen, but before I do that, anybody have any questions, anything else, anything from what we've covered you want me to speak into briefly as far as a question is concerned? And then I'm going to lead us into a few thoughts as we kind of wrap up here. And I guess I need to say as well, while you're thinking of that, if there is anything, the nice thing is I'm around. And so if for some reason you want to have this discussion further, we can talk online or get together for coffee, lunch. Would love to have this discussion more. This is something I'm very passionate about, and would love to, and I'm available to help if that becomes necessary. But anyway, any questions? If not, then I guess for those of you that are on the call today, what was the biggest takeaway for you from this whole discussion? Going right back to when we started this at the end of February. So I guess we're looking at now 4 months, 3.5 months, something like that. Is there one thing that you can say, yeah, the light bulb went on in this one, and maybe there's several things, but what would be the one thing, the biggest thing that sticks out to you that has kind of changed your thinking in regard to church life?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, and I have to say I struggled with this like every Sunday, is that there is a real church, a New Testament church, that doesn't act like the Western model of the church. That it's a genuine New Testament expression of the body of Christ that is different. And Sunday by Sunday, I wrestle with the Sunday morning service being the most important thing, and that's all we're doing.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we can really be a good church, an effective church that is not like the American model that is prevalent. So that's my first takeaway.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Anybody else?
Yeah, Lloyd, I would say that one of the things that I noticed is that through it all, I think one of the things I've come to understand, especially even with the here in the Valley, every single church is unique in itself, and every group, and I think, yeah, same with if you're planting a church at a house or something, that they're going to be unique, and they're going to have to fit the need of that specific group. Planning meetings around, sometimes you're going to have to plan the meetings around and gatherings around everyone's schedules instead of the other way around, and discussing topics that pertain to the people that are attending that group. So I've understood that that's really more so than just setting that we're going to tell you what you're going to do and this is where we're going to meet. I think it's good. I think the Spirit knows what each church needs, and I think the Spirit communicates how we need to be cared for and taught and motivated. So I really believe that the church needs to operate almost autonomously and act more like you're saying, Lord, as a missionary to sometimes I think the pastor needs to act more like a missionary to the church than they do to act like a pastor. And the goal needs to be help the churches equip, be trained, and reach and send. And I think that's where I've come to that realization more so, especially for the church here in Hanford. So, and that's how I feel about that.
Wow, that's really amazing to hear, Malcolm. Yeah, I was thinking in what you're describing, that's a radically different model that a lot of times it's almost like hospice care in a church of the institution versus, the types of activities you talked about, sending, mobilizing, all that. That's a very, very different model. So I think a big takeaway for me, this is maybe going to sound really simple, but I feel like there's a freshness around bounded set and centered set, and it's probably just really contextual for me, because I am, one of the questions I keep wrestling with as a Kairos is like, if Jesus had my job and lived in Bandon, what would he do? And so that's a really new, fresh thing, not because I've never thought that before, but my job has changed radically. And so the centered set has given me a real honest picture of literally gathering around Jesus. There's a business in the middle of that and some other ancillary things, but I am noticing people gathered around that then. And sometimes with some relationships, Jesus is center stage, and others, he's just who we represent, and they don't quite know that. So that bounded set versus centered set has been really, really helpful for me.
Michael, in a way, you're exactly what Lloyd's talking about. You're at that place right now. If you think about it, and Lloyd, you and Kathy are too.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. Exactly. You're right there right now. Yeah. Me and Dayton are sort of still anchored where we were at. And to that point, although Dayton, I got to say, you're probably farther ahead than we are here, because you've already decided that, you guys meet at your home now, and you're more, and you can be mobile if you want to. And that's an advantage, I think. We still got the anchored thought here. This is where we are. This building, it's still a struggle sometimes. This building isn't the church, and you have to continue to remind them of that.
Yeah.
And I said, the building's old. It's falling apart. I said, hopefully we're not that same. And so, it's a difficult thing to go through. So I think I'm actually going to watch Michael and pay attention to what Michael and Lloyd are doing, because they're at that place now where, man, this is something I'm going to encourage my people, and I'm going to keep telling them what's going on with you guys. So maybe that'll give them some encouragement too.
Yeah, no, good thoughts. And you're right, the bounded set versus centered set thing, man, there's a lot there. And I think one of the pieces, and I think, Michael, you're experiencing this, like you say, firsthand right now, and especially considering your previous role and roles in the church. And I think all of us on this call can identify with the fact that for us, church life has been largely around the bounded sets. And we find it, in fact, we're uncomfortable living in a centered set environment. And as a result of that, there's this gravitational pull that we're always trying to find our way back to the bounded sets. And by the way, there's a place for bounded sets. We don't forget that. But when that's the exclusivity of what we're doing, then I think we run into a lot of problems. And unfortunately, a lot of church life, that's where it stops. And so we've got to find new ways of doing it. And again, these models, the decentralized models, I think can open up possibilities for that. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay, so next question then is, so what's one immediate action step that you're going to take? So is there something from this discussion? I mean, it might be small. Again, I pray none of you are going to on Sunday announce this wholesale, massive earthquake change, unless God's telling you to do that. And there are times, by the way, where, very rare times, but there are times where maybe that is the solution, but that would not be the one I would recommend normally. What would be one immediate action step that you're going to take as a result of this whole discussion?
We thought what we tried, Lloyd, I don't know if will happen this summer, but we're trying to talk about towards the end of summer. And one of the things we decided that we were going to do, not so much invite people to the church, but invite people to our homes.
Yeah.
And because sometimes when you say, "Oh, come to our church," it's nothing. We're not going to hit you over the head with the Bible. It's not about church. But see, the minute they see a church building, they go, "Oh, what are or the walls go up," right? So, and you're right. The people that we've been getting coming to our church are people, and they're just traveling from church to church to church to church, and they're not people trying to discover Jesus. They've already figured that in to that point. And so, but I know the people in this community, what they want to know is, who are you? Who are we? And like I just got, when you were talking a few weeks ago about what you and Kathy did with that family right across the street, they had no idea. And that really hit home with me. And it did. I told the people on our Zoom conference, our Zoom meeting that we had, that really hit home with a lot of them. And I said, well, and they go, maybe we could do that. I said, well, of course we could do that. You could do that right now from your own house. So me and Denise have already started that. We went right to the next door neighbors. So we lived next door to them for 10 years, never said a word to them. That's terrible.
Wow.
That's terrible. And I thought about that. So we did. So we've already been over there twice to their place, not for any length of time, for a cup of coffee and whatever, but that's how I think Lloyd, that's how it really begins. And I'm trying to encourage that with our folks at our church too. Just say hello to your next door neighbors and let them know who you are, why you live the way you do, and how you are the way you are. And I think with Michael and Kimberly and all them up in Bandon, I think that's very important. You guys would do that, Michael. I know you do. So I just think it's continue to keep conversation with the people in your community. Just let them see who you are.
Yeah, that's good. And thank you. That's really good. That's a small step that everyone can take. And those are the things that can just help people even overcome some of the fears and hesitations that they have. Because once unless you're a complete introvert that is afraid to talk to anyone, I think most people, once they get over the reluctancy and maybe some of the initial fear, I think they'll find that it can be joy-giving to build those kind of relationships. So yeah, it's good. Yeah.
I just put it in the chat. This was helpful. Again, maybe it's not helpful on one hand, so hear it with a slight warning. It is coming from a centralized church model, but it is conceptually something that Malcolm, you just put into practice. But you know how, like, when you're trying to describe to people what you're already doing, sometimes it's difficult. And so this could be really helpful language for you to use so that somebody could potentially imitate what you're doing. So Art of Neighboring, there's a great book with it. And then there's a lot of resources that they provide in a bunch of different ways. So it was really helpful for us in mobilizing people in Exeter.
Cool. The other one too, I think I mentioned it here. If not, I'll mention it again. The 3DM has a podcast right now that's really helpful called Everyday Mission. Let me see, I got to check my phone here.
I think it's Everyday Missionaries.
Everyday Mission is what it's called.
Oh, okay.
Everyday Mission. And it's just telling stories of people that are engaged with mission in their lives, wherever it is. And there's all sorts of stories, some rural, some urban, some more sophisticated than others, but they're all really interesting. So if you get a chance, and I think they do the podcast, if not weekly, every couple of weeks, and there's some good stories. And sometimes we just need to hear what other people are doing. So Malcolm, you shared, you're talking about what, the story that I shared. I think just to hear other people's stories that can help people, because you can tell people to do it, but when they hear how other people, others are doing it, it just helps break down some of the barriers. So yeah, that's good. Good. Any other comments on that in terms of potential action steps?
Well, my action step is I want to be alive next week. We are in such chaos. It's like I don't even have a chance to think about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm joking, but it's real. The kind of family responsibilities that we're trying to manage right now are just, it's like I don't even know what to do as a pastor. And so I guess my action step is to set a date in the future when I think things will have calmed down. It looks like they're going to calm down some because Jeanette's mom is not in our home right now. She's in the hospital, which it's amazing how much stress there is in us taking care of her. And this sounds bad, but I said she's not going to come back to our house and live. It's beyond 270-year-old people taking care of her. We can't. And it sounds, to me, it almost sounds unloving, but we can't provide the care she needs.
Right.
But anyway, so my action step is to not forget this and look down the road maybe 2 or 3 months when I have some time to actually truly engage. And Lloyd, I have to tell you, I haven't really been able to engage thinking wise with what you have been presenting. It's basically been whatever it is I get when I manage to be here. So my action step is going to be put it on a calendar and probably give you a call, take you out to coffee and come up to Fresno and let you start over with me.
Yeah.
Because I really like that the concepts are what faith community can do. We cannot do Sierra Pines. We can't even do Exeter anymore. That's not the church we are. But I do believe that we are an alive church that loves God, loves each other, and my people are constantly sharing Christ with people. I mean, it's just who we are, and I love that. But there's not any real plan in place, and that's the thing that I feel like I need to really pull together. And Michael's listening, and he's heard the same thing for the last 3 years, I think. It's like same old. And being part-time and working. Well, Michael, now you were doing that some, but now you've got to generate your income by the sweat of your brow. And I really appreciated what Malcolm had to say about changing the role of a pastor from being the pastor shepherd to being more of a missionary. And when I say missionary, I think of the apostolos, the Greek word for the sent one, that we see ourselves as that and being real change agents where we're at rather than just shepherding a flock. So anyway, I don't have more of an action step.
That's good. That's
where
good.
I'm at.
Got to start somewhere. Absolutely.
Well, that's important, Dayton, because of the missionary sense is that if the pastor himself doesn't have that, like what we're talking DNA in him to share with his flock, as we call them, it's not going to work. It's going to be a total disconnect. And so it's really important that everyone's on the same team and on board with the same thing that we're talking about, at least a certain group of your leaders in your church and yourself. Because if you're not, it's just like I said, I've been through it. It's total chaotic. and it just be it breaks. It just breaks. Everything starts to break down. It just does.
We have become so programmatic in our approaches, and programs don't change people. And what Lloyd's talking about, and especially Malcolm, what you're talking about, is actually changing the way people think, rather than just trying to change. Now we're changing the program. We're meeting at a different time. We're doing whatever. And what we're talking about here is actually changing the way people think about what church is and what ministry is.
Which can ultimately lead to change behavior. Because
Say
I
that
think
again, Lloyd?
which can also lead to change behavior.
Yes, it ultimately will do that. I think sometimes we jump into changed behavior before we've changed the value system.
Right. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, listen, just in light of the time here, we'll need to wrap up, but this has been a lot of fun. You have my email if you need to contact me. Don't hesitate to do that. I'll hopefully see you all around at various points. I'm even going to try to, and I'm going to do this. I mean, I won't promise, I won't give you a timeline, but I'd love to come down to Hanford sometime and on a Sunday morning. And Dayton, when do you guys meet?
Well, it flexes, but most often it's 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon.
In other words, check with you first.
Check with me first. Yeah.
Yeah.
I say we're a dinghy, and we're not an aircraft carrier. Dinghies spin on a dime.
There you
And
go.
so we can change on well, last Sunday we changed, or for last Sunday we changed Saturday afternoon because everybody got sick. COVID jumped in again. So we've got COVID going around our church again. And so we made it all Zoom.
Yeah.
Instead of people gathering at my home, it was just all Zoom. And that happened like 24 hours before we were going to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, that's good. And then I hope, and Michael, is it true that these videos will stay online for a while? So that
Yep,
people can
they will. I'm having to change them from the account that they're on, but I will have new links for that. So I'm in the middle of doing that for the rest of the month.
Well, good. Let's leave it there. Can I pray for you guys, for all of you, everyone? And then Michael, you can wrap up whatever you need to do here. Let's just take a moment to do that. Lord, thank you. Thank you so much for the way you have led us through this discussion over these past few months. And I thank you, God, for the pastors and leaders who are anxiously, looking at and observing and trying to figure out what church next looks like. And not just for the sake of trying to change things, but God, because we really love you. We really want to make a difference in the world in which we find ourselves. So God, thank you for their commitment, their calling, their desire to follow you. And I just pray your blessings upon them, give them wisdom as they seek to find what you are saying and how they can respond to that through their lives and action. Thank you, God. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Right. Well, really two things that come to mind. One, I just want to say goodbye. This is really the last scheduled meeting that I have as regional pastor. There will be others that I'll be doing that'll be more impromptu, but this is the last of all of those meetings. The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill finished this last Tuesday. Bible Project finished just a couple of weeks back, and then this group is now wrapping up. And so June 30th is my final day at the helm. And so thanks so much for all of the time. It has been such a blessing for the last 5 years to be able to be in this role. And really, I think my favorite part has just been getting to know everybody at a much deeper level. And it has been quite wonderful. So really just want to say goodbye in that sense. If I could give a final directive, especially to this group right here, and I know directive is not necessarily the language that we use in Church of God, but I'm going to pull on challenge as much as I can.
Besides, you're leaving anyways. You can,
I can do it,
you can
right?
say whatever you want now,
yeah.
So.
The three of you in particular have a really unique opportunity because of Lloyd's move into the valley and because of the place that you're at. And so there's a really ripe kairos for where you are. The raw ingredients that I think that, besides just yourselves and what you bring to the table, is if you just simply scheduled a regular meeting via Zoom and a rhythm for meeting in person. That's very similar to what the PCC has done. There were weekly meetings on Zoom, and then there were quarterly times to get together in person. You could decide whatever those rhythms are, but if you aimed to, I'd suggest build a hub and invite Lloyd to help you to build that hub. This isn't what Lloyd is going to do, but this is what Malcolm and Dayton are going to do, potentially with others. Invite Lloyd to help you to build that hub. It's the place where you currently are, and it's the place that really Central California needs to move toward. Now, I have no idea about like the steps to be able to get there. Does that mean you riff off of the hub that's already in Washington? Potentially, but you know, I do think that you could move in that direction. Maybe it's not exactly the same model that they have, where you take the bylaws and then reform together. But I do think that where you guys are, that would make huge sense. If you don't, 3 years from now, Dayton will say the same thing on a call. And so I think make a plan between the three of you, and then consider who else to invite on that journey when you're going to meet next, and just bring some predictable pattern to that, and then feel all of that kind of stuff out. I think that would really be great. And I would encourage you, pay Lloyd to do that. Like, find a way to be able to take money that you have in your budget. And you know, again, I don't know that Lloyd's looking for this, but I keep giving him jobs and promoting his
I
business.
don't have time to do the other things I need to do, but that's okay.
But for the amount of time, I think that I would envision that would require, you can pull upon his expertise in order to do that, and then you could compensate him to help lead some of that stuff out. So, all right, guys, it has been
Good.
Great, and I love you guys a whole bunch.
Thanks. It's been fun. We'll see you around, Michael.
All
I'm
right.
sure
You
we'll
bet,
have contact
Michael.
soon.
Yeah.
too,
We'll
so,
we'll still be talking, Michael.
yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Take care, all.
Take care, guys.